and welcome to Exploring Santa Cruz, a bi-weekly program on KSQD Santa Cruz. Today's topic is Services and Support for Unhoused People with Steve Pleich. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you.
It's the season to share a holiday meal with the community. Steve, so how did that ever get started?
Well, this is a wonderful story for your listeners, not only about Thanksgiving, but about the kind of community we live in. I'll take your listeners back about 10 years. At that time, I was doing some radio with Robert Norris on free radio. And I had read in the Sentinel that day that the veterans who had done Thanksgiving meal for 25 years weren't able to do their meal that year because they had some seismic problems in their building, the Veterans Memorial Building, and it had been red tagged by the county. Just coincidentally, on the radio program, Bob Patton called in. Bob was the commander of the vets at that particular building. And so I talked to Bob, and I said, Bob, I read the article about Thanksgiving. I said, it's just a shame you can't do this traditional meal. You know, is there any way it's going to happen? He said, no, it takes us months to do, and, you know, we're out of our building. The county isn't allowing us to have any activities there, so we just can't do it. I said, well, would you mind if I tried to put some people together? You know, see if we can salvage this and kind of as a placeholder for the vets, see if we can get something going. He said, no, go ahead and do that. So the next day I went out and bought one of these little candy bar cell phones, the little teeny things, got some minutes on it. First call I made was to Mike Rotkin, who at then was sitting on city council. Mike referred me to Don Lane. Don Lane, one of the original members of what came to be known as the Friends of Thanksgiving. Don Lane, Monica Martinez, who was at that time the executive director of Homeless Services Center, their volunteer coordinator, Megan Carlson, Fred Keeley, and several other people. Those are the ones that your listeners would be familiar with. We started to raise some money, started to kind of put this thing together. Dennis Adams, who was a pastor of the Acts of Love Foundation in Boulder Creek, he and I had done some Christmas Eve dinners at Homeless Services Center. So I said, Dennis, we'd like to have you on board here, become part of this program. And he said, I'd love to do it, and let me bring my son, who is a 5-star chef, along with it. So this was in early October. In that succeeding 5 weeks, we managed to raise $6,500, much of which was raised by Fred Keeley himself personally. Neil Coonerty, who was the supervisor at that time, was able to secure the Civic for us, which at that time was $5,000 a night. So we got that cost-free. Megan Carlson became our volunteer coordinator. So in 5 weeks, we put together a dinner. We got donations from just about everybody, including Barreto's, for some nice linens for the tables. And people came in and put pine cones and nice, attractive decorations. And to make the Civic, this warm, wonderful, inviting place that my understanding was the vets had always done at the Veterans Memorial Building. So we tried to kind of duplicate that as much as possible. But for our dinner, we were able to get this going, and on Thanksgiving Day, we had 400 volunteers, and we served 1,500 meals. That was my original introduction to this whole tradition of Thanksgiving meals at that time of the year and the holiday meals. And we were able to keep that meal going at the Civic as a placeholder, really, for the vets until 2014. In 2014, they had resolved their disagreement with the county. They were able to get back into their building. And kind of because we had been involved and the vets themselves were getting a little older and a little less able to kind of put on what really is a big effort to get this done, I decided the Friends of Thanksgiving would participate with them. We brought Joseph Schultz on at that time, as everybody knows Joseph, as our chef. And so we're able to have dinners there from 2014 until the COVID situation arose, and for the last 2 years haven't been able to do that. But it was really such a community Santa Cruz event that people are so generous. You know, they're so giving. They're so willing to participate to help people who are less fortunate. I was really moved by that. It was really my first introduction to what we are as a community. So we've been able to do those dinners the last couple of years. It's always been my mission personally to make sure that the unhoused people in Santa Cruz have a warm, traditional holiday meal. The unhoused people in Santa Cruz look forward to this every year. They have for 20 years, well before my participation. So it's always been my mission to, wherever we were going to have this meal, And just as happenstance and the public safety considerations have dictated over the last couple of years, been able to only have it outdoors and only with Food Not Bombs. So we've been able to successfully put that meal on and have that great holiday tradition continue. And we're hoping that that next year we'll be able to get back with the vets again in the Veterans Memorial Building and be able to kind of carry on that tradition, which then will be 35 years. So it's just a tremendous thing to be involved with, and just kind of a quirky thing that happened that really warms my heart every time I think about it.
Having lived here for longer than you have, I have participated both as a volunteer, but also as sitting down as a community member, because it's not just serving unhoused people. It is really a community event. And unhoused people worked also with the meals, and we also sat down with them, and we had some really nice conversations.
No, you're so right. One of the things that I always wanted to do was not only create an atmosphere where you're inviting people into your home, but also have volunteers sit down and share a meal. My good friend Mel Nunes, he always says that that's the idea, is to sit down with people. Just don't serve them only. Sit down, share an experience, have a meal, and really find out what their lives are like, and in turn, share your experiences with them. And we've been able to do that, so I'm really pleased with that.
Now, this year you had a Thanksgiving dinner.
We did. Again, we partnered with Food Not Bombs, as with Keith McHenry and his group, as we had done last year because of COVID. Last year, we actually submitted a pretty formal proposal to Dr. Newell, Gail Newell, who's our public health official here, and said, can we do this? Do you think we can have a large gathering like this and do it safely? And she just said, no, I don't think so. And we understood that completely. We said, I understand the concerns. It's all about community public health, public safety. So we'll do something else. And so we turned to Food Not Bombs, who is doing, they have a meal there every day, all during the COVID pandemic. They've been there for 380 days or something consecutively. So, and Keith's a good friend. So I said, Keith, I'd like to come over. And part of this that's interesting is Food Not Bombs is vegan, strictly vegan. So I said, Keith, I'd like to come over and do a traditional turkey meal. You think we can do it? He said, no problem. Said it's, it's the holidays. And not only were we able to do last year the Thanksgiving meal with them, and this year as well, but we also did Christmas with them last year and served a full ham dinner there. And the reason that we couldn't do that was that the dinner, I mentioned Dennis Adams earlier, who he and I did dinners at the Homeless Services Center on Christmas Eve for many years. We came to realize that Christmas Day, there were no meals for the homeless folks. Most of the church communities really are tending to their own congregations. They're pretty insular about the things that they do. And so we said, gosh, there's got to be a way to provide, a Christmas meal on Christmas Day. So I had done some work with the Museum of Art and History, of all places. And I went over and talked to those folks. I said, would you be interested in hosting a meal on Christmas Day for unhoused people in Santa Cruz? And they could not have been more welcoming. They have been a great partner. We did that for 5 years up until the pandemic, and we're hoping we'll be able to continue after that's passed. But for those folks who think that the Museum of Art History is all about gentrification and all about people who have money, and it's really kind of an elitist thing, it is not at all. They have been the greatest partners and the greatest helpers to help unhoused people at Christmas time really enjoy the holidays. And believe me, when we did the dinners at Museum of Art and History, it was like coming into your own home, because we got the Girl Scouts came and decorated the hall, and we had Christmas presents. The last year, Santa Cruz Bible Church, bless their hearts, did a coat drive for them, and they donated 200 brand new coats. So it's just the kind of thing that you expect from Santa Cruz, but every time it happens, it as I say, it warms your heart, and you say, well, this is a place where special things happen, and it really is.
So this year you didn't have a sit-down dinner, you have a kind of a takeout?
Well, what happens is Keith serves in the lot at Front and Laurel, and we brought some chairs in so people could actually get their meal and then sit down. It's outside, but it's kind of like a sit-down meal. It does lack some of the intimacy that we've always tried to bring to the dinners, and certainly the vets had a long tradition of that, so we're kind of trying to honor that. But we got people there, and they're able to sit down, and the volunteers are there. they're able to go and talk to some folks and share some experiences. So not ideal, but we're all making compromises during the pandemic time to keep ourselves safe. But we're still things that we think are so important that we're willing to go the extra mile and make them happen.
That is fantastic. Switching topic. You're also personally involved and you're going a little deeper. The meals at the specific time of the year are great, but there are other needs that need to be met. And you offer things year-round, such as your Homeless Persons Legal Assistance Project. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Thanks for asking. During my time as a homeless advocate, a houseless advocate, I've noticed that while we don't have a lot of emergency sheltering, we do have some. There are opportunities for people through Food Not Bomb, the St. Francis Soup Kitchen, and others to really get some food banks to get some food. But the one disconnect was that there was really no access to legal services for unhoused people. They had absolutely no connection with the legal system at all, except when they got a ticket or they had some problem they had to deal with. So we created 4 or 5 years back the Homeless Persons Legal Assistance Project. It is a California corporation now. It is a nonprofit through the United Nations Association. And we've been able to bring on a couple of local attorneys to be able to give some consultation if the particular issue rises to the level of they may need some representation. But we really wanted to have some way to connect the unhoused community with the legal system in a way that they could navigate the system, they could understand the system, and at a time when the federal government is not allowing cities and counties to move homeless folks around, there are local ordinances that at some point will come into play. And those are the times, I think, when the unhoused community will most need some legal services, some advice, some, as I say, way to navigate the system, some way to understand kind of what's happening, what their rights are. Those things are very important. So we've been able to provide some of that, and we've gotten busier over time because I think there's more of an emphasis on that, and we've become more well-known as somebody who at least can give some connection to the legal community, to unhoused folk, and allow them to be empowered in the system a little more than they have been in the past.
And so you don't provide you're not lawyers that provide the legal services, but you give assistance and connect people?
Yeah, my position, I'm a bar-eligible law school graduate, which means that I'm a lawyer, but I'm not a member of the California State Bar. So what I do is function as kind of an administrator. Some people come in, I'll look at their issue, analyze the facts, say, okay, I think this is your legal issue. And if it's something that they can resolve themselves by having myself or somebody else in the office take them to the law library or take them over to the courthouse and say, well, this is where you have to be, or this is the clerk you have to talk to, then we can do that. It's not legal representation, it's legal assistance. But fortunately, and the reason why I have some local attorneys willing to put some pro bono work into it, is if they need representation by a member of the California State Bar, and we're very careful about that, then they can have a teleconsult with them, or they can actually go to their office if it's convenient, and talk to them about this issue and see where it can go from there. But at least we're connecting the unhoused folks with the ability to either help themselves out or be able to connect with people who can help them at least understand their problem and help them navigate through it.
What's the impact that you can see that has on the unhoused people?
What I've seen is that unhoused people are a lot more willing to become involved in whatever legal issues they have. What has happened historically is that about 95% of all the quality of life or behavioral-based ordinances, violations that homeless people get, go unattended, which means they never go to court. They never do anything. They end up in fines that accumulate, that either stay here for debt collection or be sent to Southern California, the franchise tax board debt collection, which is even worse because that affects your ability to be licensed to do things in California. So it can really get complicated. But I think that now they're more willing to kind of engage in that and actually say, well, what do I have to do? What can I do? And not leave it unattended where the worst really consequences will happen.
So if you just build up tickets, at some point you're going to turn off and not serving yourself and not being able to reach out to do
And those tickets don't go away, so it impacts your ability to seek employment, it impacts your ability for housing, it impacts your ability for benefits. All those things will come back as part of your record. And what we've been able to do also is people who have past offenses they've already been convicted for, we can help them clear their records. There's record clearance procedures. The Public Defender's Office has a wonderful program. They used to be called Clean Slate. It may still be called Clean Slate now. But we can also separately help people to get those records cleared, and so that will help them, in terms of their application for, as I say, employment, housing, benefits, those kinds of things. So it's very important, I think, to be able to have access to that service.
Is one of the impacts that they may feel more connected to our community?
Absolutely. You really have to be empowered within a system to be able to navigate it effectively. Mm-hmm. And if you're completely disconnected from it and fearful of it, you're really never going to get the benefit of it. And there are benefits to the criminal justice system that people can understand and work through. So we're trying to get people to kind of have that, to visualize that for themselves and be able to be part of it.
And be part of the community,
yeah.
I'd like to remind our listeners that you're listening to Exploring Santa Cruz on KSQD 90.7 FM. I'm here with Steve Pleich, a board member and volunteer for several organizations working with houseless people. Steve, you're also very concerned about all the people camping outside when weather is changing. What's happening right now? There's about 200 tents, so that may be 250 people or so in the benchlands. As you know, there's a large homeless encampment by Felker Street underneath where Highway 1 runs. That's maybe another couple of hundred tents. There is what used to be called the winter shelter, which has now been extended to a permanent shelter at the Armory up at De La Viega, which is about 100 tents or so. So all of those folks are going to be subject weather dependent about whether or not they'll be able to stay and whether or not those conditions will even be habitable, as we go into, at some point, Matilda, it's going to rain. We keep waiting for it, but at some point the conditions are going to be such that living outside is going to be very difficult and very challenging. And what I would have liked to have seen, and this is the reason that I am trying to contact the new homeless services manager for the city, Larry Imwall, contact city council members, work with people in the county, is to get answers about what we're going to do. Where are those people going to go? You're talking about upwards to 700 people, visible people now in Santa Cruz, where that population used to be relatively invisible because of the lack of emergency sheltering. But now they're very visible. Where are those people going to go? I'm not hearing any solid plan. I'm not hearing any policies being developed they're really going to address that. So I'm very concerned about that. We're going to keep inquiring about what's going to happen with that, as well as people living in motorhomes. I think I mentioned to you at some point that there are, in my estimation, 200 to 300 motorhomes in Santa Cruz County, which by and large are people's primary residences. And that's happened because, people lose their jobs. Job loss is the number one cause of homelessness. They lose their jobs, they can't pay their rent, so with the money that they have, what little savings they have, they'll buy a motorhome so they can keep the family unit together. That's how they do that. But there's no place for them to park, and the city is making restrictions on RV parking more and more onerous, more and more restrictive in many ways. So I'm wondering what's going to happen with those folks. So you're looking at nearly 1,000 people, and that's just about what the population of Santa Cruz is in terms of unhoused folks, according to our census and survey. What's going to happen with those people when the weather turns bad, when the opportunity for the encampments that are in place now are dissolved, or moved on, or dislocated? I'm concerned, and so we're working on that all the time. Now, you say we are working. Whom are you working with? I work with one organization, is Association of Faith Communities. It's 5 or 6, 7 years ago, maybe now. There was a big meeting of all the faith communities at the Red Church at Calvary Episcopal. I'm not a faith guy myself, but they brought me in because I'm a community organizer. I have some community connections. But out of that came the Association of Faith Communities, which is an organization that ministers to not only unhoused people, but also working poor and poor people. So they have generated some faith community shelter programs, some safe spaces parking programs, but they're small in scope.
They're modelable. They could be expanded. They could be used as good examples of what can happen if the city or county chose to look at those examples and say, yes, we want to participate in that and provide those to a larger number of people. But they really haven't right now. So the Associated Faith Communities really is doing great work, but they become, unfortunately, kind of the fallback for the institution's lack of really resource and vision about how to address this particular condition of unhoused people.
Mm-hmm. They are involved with the shelters also.
The AFC has a faith community shelter, of which I am a coordinator of one. They have the Safe Spaces Parking Program, which involves 8 churches, and I think there are probably 40 people involved with the program who are in RVs that they're only allowed to stay now overnight. Initially, they were able to develop tenancies and actually stay there 24 hours a day. That has changed somewhat. But that's more of a legal problem about whether or not you want to create a tenancy on a property, and we won't have to get into that. But we're hoping that at some point that will be expanded, of course. But those are the kinds of things that we're thinking that the city and county might want to take a look at. The AFC has done great work, but faith communities can't always be the fallback for the institution's lack of participation in resolving the situation of unhoused people.
I remember years ago, my husband would be gone a couple nights because he was at different shelters. Sometimes they were at the resource center and they were at different churches. Is that still happening, the rotation?
Yeah, it's interesting. Because of COVID, both of our shelters, and we had 2 at the time, were sheltering in place at 2 different churches. One was United Methodist in California, and one was Resurrection Church in Aptos. And we were there 24/7. So it involved a lot more coordinator hours because we really had to be there to supervise folks 12 hours out of every 24. And we were at either of those places through the great graces of the Methodists in California Avenue and Resurrection Church for nearly 18 months. But now we've gone back to our previous model, which is a rotating model. Mm-hmm. And so we will be at one church this evening, we'll be at another church tomorrow evening, another church next evening. And the wonderful part about that has always been that the meals, which were served by the county when we were provided by the county when we were sheltering in place, are once again provided by the church parishioners and their congregants. So they can come in and serve, and to the extent that we can with social distancing, they can sit down again and have a meal. They can share some experiences. So we're kind of back to a more intimate living situation for unhoused folks that we much preferred really over the sheltering in place. I did personally. And so we're hoping that at some point those programs will also increase in size, so that those models will actually be used to be able to give people an opportunity not only to shelter night to night, but also to be transitional. One thing I learned working with the faith community was their mission is all about transition. It's all about where you are today is building on where you're going to be tomorrow. And to its credit, the Faith Community Shelter, and this is really to the credit of the managers and the coordinators, and I wish I could take more credit for it than I can, but I don't and won't. But we have been able to shelter about 40% of all the people that have been in our program, which is a tremendous success story, and they're to be complimented and applauded for that. But that's hard work, that's connecting people with the resources, that's doing it day to day. That's making sure that people are taking 2 steps forward for every 1 step back, because ultimately you'll get there.
Right. Before we go into my last question, let's give people some contact information. Can you give us the information for the meals? How can people donate or communicate?
The best way right now is to donate to Food Not Bombs, and they have a website that's easily accessible. I don't know it right offhand, but Keith and those folks do such a great job. But they're always looking for volunteers and donations. So I would urge people to look into maybe investing a couple of bucks in that, and maybe doing a little volunteer work for them. They do all their cooking at the Red Church every day, but as I say, they're serving a meal to the houseless folks every single day. So that would be my recommendation.
Okay. And the Homeless Persons Legal Assistance Project that we're talking about, I understand the email address is hplap heplop@gmail.com?
Yeah, it's just heplop@gmail.com, or they can just send me an email at spleich@gmail.com, and they can also contact me at 831-466-6078, and we will happily take any donations that people are interested in giving. But right now our overhead is really low, and we're really able to sustain ourselves without much in the way of donations. So if the first choice is Food Not Bombs or the AFC, then I would recommend that.
Okay, good. And let's make sure that people know how to spell your name so they can send you an email. It's S for Steve, and then Pleich is Pleich.
That's it.
spleich
That's
at
right.
gmail.com. And of course, we want to give the information for AFCSC.org, which stands for Association of Faith Communities of Santa Cruz County.
Yeah, and they do great work. They have been steadfast during this entire pandemic. We also raise all of our money through donations. They did have a grant from the Homeless Emergency Assistance Program that sustained us during pandemic and sheltering in place, but that's been exhausted now. That's expired. So they're back to doing fundraising ourselves. So that would be an excellent place for people to donate a couple of bucks if they have it.
Good. Now I have one last question for about a minute and a half.
Sure.
How do you see the future of unhoused people in Santa Cruz?
Well, I see them, number one, a lot more engaged in their own futures. I think that the more that they really engage, even though they're suspicious of the institutions, the more they engage with the institutions, and particularly their city council members and their supervisors, I think the more support and services they'll be able to get. But I would like to see much more in the way of emergency sheltering developed. And really what we need ultimately to help people who are unhoused transition is transitional and permanent supportive housing. Housing Matters is building a 120-unit facility on their campus, which is going to be transitional and permanent supportive housing. It's a wonderful program. It's a way to get people off the streets and into, ultimately, housing. And if you've ever seen somebody transition from being unhoused to housed, it is a transformative change in folks, and that is really what we need. It's trite to say that what's the answer to homelessness is housing people, but if you can do it, that would be the answer.
Steve, thank you so much for being here and answering all my questions and giving me more information than I thought I could get out of you. So it was terrific.
Well, thanks to everybody at Case Good. You guys are doing wonderful work. Support your local community radio. They're doing the work. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And we'll go out with our music.